Hi, everybody, and welcome to Unmasked. Today we'll be talking with actress, author, and world-class extraordinaire, Kelsey Darragh. Kelsey, welcome to the show.
Wow, I don't think I've ever been introduced that way. Thank you.
It started with positive vibes here.
I like that. Well, yeah, with what we're going to talk about, I guess it's best to gas me up to start.
Yeah. It's good to start with a smile.
Yeah.
So I mean, I've done a lot of reading on you lately. Looked at your history, the things that you do. But let's talk about the history of your depression and where it came from. So, what was your earliest memory of when you were depressed?
Man, it's funny. I used to always resort back to this one story that stuck out in my mind about my first panic attack when I was 17. But when I was writing my book, I had to go deeper into my past and talk to the people in my life where I realized I was having signs and symptoms way earlier than that one kind of memory and story that I often referred to with people. I remember being on a soccer team when I was a toddler and walking up and down the bench and asking my friends if they felt like they couldn't breathe and that the world felt like it was closing in, and they'd be like, what? I had these really dark, intrusive thoughts a lot earlier than what I thought was, quote unquote, the start of it. And so it's probably even earlier than what I can recall, but for as long as I've been alive, I've had signs and symptoms of depression and anxiety, for sure.
So you're talking about, the example being the soccer game, but what kind of thoughts are these? Are they just you wanting to be away from people, or, what are you doing there? What goes through your mind at that point in time?
Gosh, it was such a push and pull of wanting to be liked, wanting to be around people, and then wanting to be completely alone and sleep. I remember sleep being something at a certain age that hit me I was never, ever getting enough sleep. And so I slowly started to pull back from these activities, or, what I thought was not enough sleep. I'm sure I was oversleeping at some point. But I started to withdraw a lot from things I loved to do. I stopped playing piano, I stopped playing sports, and then I got into weed very early in my life, which probably didn't help. I was doing a Band-Aid over a bullet hole, but I like to warn people, I grew up in Florida, so I got into and out of things very early in life, and blessing and a curse, I could see the pros and cons of both sides of that.
I mean, that's Florida, right?
Yes. It's like Euphoria. Are you watching Euphoria?
No, yeah, it's actually on my to-do list now that, we have our internet back.
Yeah, people are this show is too depressing, or it makes me too anxious. And I'm like, man, you guys really had an idyllic childhood, huh?
So looking back, I mean, how did that affect your, ability to forge relationships with other people your age and your family and people at school? Was it tough?
I became very involved with things that I could use as a mask in order to up my cool cred, or my to cover my social anxiety. So I actually started selling weed in high school because I wanted to, but because it got me in with the in crowd, and I started getting really good at drinking and beer pong, and I soon became super, I was always the girl people wanted on their beer pong team, and I wore these things such a badge of honor because it made me like my peers, instead of going, maybe there's something else happening and chemically different. And I'm 31, and it's not like we weren't talking about mental health. It just certainly wasn't what we are talking about with it now. 15, 20 years ago, no one was taking their kid to a shrink because they just wanted them to feel better. They were like, something is fucking wrong with my child. They're painting in their blood, or they're drawing dark circles on a piece of it. It was not,
Yeah.
Just to check in.
It wasn't a Dexter moment or anything like that.
No.
What about your parents? Like, did they notice you just kind of withdrawing from people? Like, how did it affect them?
I have the best parents in the world. They are very liberal, and to grow up in like such a conservative, crazy place like Florida, I feel really lucky that we had the wherewithal for them to say like, hey, we should take her to a therapist. But that doesn't mean that they knew exactly what was going on. There was, they worked a lot. I wasn't raised by my mom and dad. I was raised by like a nanny who I consider to be like my mom. And they weren't really around the way the nurturing mother would be. And I'm actually super grateful for that, because I think I developed like a really strong resilience, and my relationship with my parents is unlike anyone else's I know. We're very close. And so I'm grateful that they were like that. And I know it's also incredibly unusual to have had parents that worked 365 days a year growing up.
You've been pretty outspoken about, coming to terms with your sexuality, like, at a younger age. Like, how do you think that might have impacted, your social anxiety and your depression, and how you felt about yourself? Like, what was that struggle like?
Oh my God. Well, I was, again, grew up in Florida. I was the last person to have sex of my friend group. I was the last person to do anything with a guy. Like, no, there were no queer people in my town. No one was out in my high school. And all I wanted to do was like make out with girls at slumber parties. And like, that was this excitement and terror, right? Of knowing that I felt very different, and I knew that other girls weren't feeling this way, or at least weren't showing it. So to have felt that comfortable with my feelings as someone who identifies as bisexual was, I feel like I had a lot more time with it than most people do in the queer community. But I also think that it also places another layer of social anxiety into relationships, that you never feel X enough for this type of person or this type of sexual identity. And so it's certainly something I feel very confident in. I don't question it at all, but also I'd be lying if I said I was like the best bisexual out there. Like, I don't even know what the fuck that means, but I don't claim it.
I know what you mean, though. I mean, when I was younger, I had a cousin that he struggled with being a gay man living a straight life, and he actually committed suicide when I was younger. And it was like, it's one of those things that has an impact on you. It's like things about, say, some of your friends, and you try and be supportive, even if they're not saying it. You kind of know. You see the signs. It's like, hey man, like, I'm your friend. I want to be there to support you. And I think that's kind of important these days. It's like, people should feel comfortable, just being who they are.
Right. It's tough in the South. I'll say that. Every time I go home, I'm kind of like, oh, okay, yep, I see where people can still definitely struggle still with that concept. Yeah.
No, that's it's a tough subject for a lot of people. So when sort of later in life, when you were telling people that you were depressed, you suffer from social anxiety, outside of your family, like, what were people's reactions to that? Like, were they surprised? Were they supportive? Like, how did that go? It wasn't until I myself was comfortable in understanding of what was happening with my mental health that anyone else was. Like, I didn't know there was such a thing as an anxiety disorder until, I was 17 and had made my mom like drive me to a ER to like, because I thought my chest was exploding and I was having a heart attack or I was dying or something, So it wasn't even something I was really comfortable with to talk about with my friends in high school. But when I got to, more college, young adult age, and the world was kind of talking about it more, and that's when now I say it like that's maybe one of the first things I introduce myself, like I have no problem. I'm so against the idea of like mental health being a taboo against someone's identity
I feared, like, is this going to be something that someone Googles me and the first thing that pops up is about, like, the chapter in my book where I talk about suicidal ideology, or, like, you know, my BuzzFeed videos that I made about all the pills I was on. You know, I was so fearful. But when I really, the first video I ever made about it, that went, like, viral at BuzzFeed, the response was so positive that I didn't give a shit about the one or two negative comments you'd get about someone who tells you, you know, go kill yourself, or this girl is faking it, or this girl just wants attention. It's like there's always going to be those people who don't understand it or get it or think that mental illness looks like a certain way on someone. And to those people, I just say, like, I don't want to be your fucking friend anyway. So not too bothered by any naysayers or difficult people, because I don't have them in my life.
Well, while we're on that topic, suicide. I know it's a really uncomfortable word that people kind of dance around, and I know you've talked a little about it. Let's talk about the worst moment in your life, your shittiest, darkest spot. What happened and what was going through your head at the time?
I was very directionless. It was in my early 20s. I, chose entertainment as a career, which is like such an unstable thing for also someone who's mentally unstable to get themselves into. I was very lucky to have the support of my family, financial support of my family. I dropped out of 3 colleges but didn't acquire any debt. So I was just constantly trying to find my place in this world and do something that felt like it gave me purpose and value. And I was dating someone at the time who was a lot older than me and a lot more successful than me. And so when we were together about 2 years and we broke up, I felt like I had become friends with all of their friends. I had, my whole life was their life. And especially at such a young age, in your early 20s, the big heartbreak, that's, everyone remembers that feeling. And I was, prior to the breakup, struggling with panic attacks and agoraphobia, not being able to leave my house. I was drinking to high heaven. I loved Coke at the time. I still love Coke, but I can't do it because I know who I am as a person and I can't do it. And I remember it was right around my birthday and I was fostering a kitten. I love to foster animals. That's a big part of my life. And one of the kittens died by what's called fading kitten syndrome. I had never even heard of it. It's basically they just look like they're going to sleep and then they die. And that had happened the week before. I had a huge bender because of my birthday. I had just been broken up with and I had no job and no income. And I was just why am I putting myself through this? Why? I wasn't even thinking about anyone else. I wasn't I shouldn't be here because of other people, or, I don't want to disappoint people. It was a very selfish thing. It was a very selfish time. And I just couldn't see. I had blinders on of the possibility of life getting better. At this point, I had tried a bunch of different medications. I was in therapy. I did a inpatient therapy treatment. I couldn't see any way this could get better. And my only thoughts were, I don't want to end my life, but I want to end this suffering. And I think that that's the truth for so many people that contemplate suicide or die by suicide or have suicidal ideologies. And I think we have to start talking about the idea of suicidal ideology as a much more common thing, because it really is. And whatever you want to call it, fate, my dumbass, or, the light, I was not successful in my attempt and called the suicide hotline and stayed on the phone with this woman for hours into the morning on a random Tuesday. And the next day I woke up with one of the worst hangovers of my life. And I It took another couple of weeks before I got into rehab, but then I ended up going to rehab because I had developed such a severe dependency on my benzodiazepine. So my Valium, I was like, I couldn't leave my house without like taking a handful of Valium because I was just so fucking anxious. And so when I think of like the deepest, darkest part of my life, that's what it was. And I'm laughing because it's like, it's so funny to look back on now because I don't even like, I laugh when I'm uncomfortable, but also that's such a thing. That's like not something I would do now, you know? It's just,
That's one thing I've learned, especially doing a lot of these interviews lately, is that, you know, when I speak to people about suicide, and I mention the word, like, no one ever says, I want to die, or I wanted to die. It's like they're at this point where, like, I just want something to change. Like, I want whatever's going on in my head to stop. Like, I want this emptiness just to go away. Like, it's not about, I just want to die. I don't want to be on this earth anymore. You know, I don't want to see my friends and family. It's like, it's this last ditch effort to be like, I'm tired of this. I just want something different.
Yeah.
And I think that's just the sad part of the conversation people have to start having. It's like, you know, like, what do you think will change, you know, if, you know, in these attempts? You know what I mean? Like, that was kind of a shitty way to put it. It's like, you know, you're not ending your pain. You're ending your life. Like, it's, there's always a way out.
It feels like I too have a cousin that died by suicide a few years ago, and the police were telling us that, like, when the person concludes that that's their choice, it's very hard to stop them unless someone is physically there to stop them. Like, there becomes a tunnel vision of sorts where they're not in their right mind, like, once they've made that decision to really go through with it. And I try to think about, like, what are we going to do for help? Like, what are we going to do for help for people that get into that frame of mind because they're not acting on themselves and they think there's no way out of what they're going through. They never, just like how I felt, there's no hope. And so how do we just get someone to stay, even if it's just for another hour or a day or another 10 minutes, you know? What do we have for tools for that besides the suicide hotline? It's like, man.
So this moment in your life that you had is obviously, you know, probably the shittiest part that, you know, it was rock bottom.
Yes.
Let's face it. But, you know, what did that teach you? You know, I know it's like, you know, there's this process of, like, you process what happens, and, you know, and it's people try to help people. Like, what did it teach you, like, internally?
God, I don't think it taught me anything in the moment. I think it still took a lot of years after to have learned from it, because it's not like it immediately got better. You know, it's not like I went to rehab and I was like, actually, I'm good.
JK, guys, I'm fine.
JK, I'm back in the game. No, it took a few years to really feel like there was purpose and oneness with the world, rather than everything feeling so, like, main character, if that makes sense. Like, when you're in that worst of your life, everything feels like it's on you. It's personal to you. Every move, every breath, every email, every conversation, everything feels so on you. And as soon as I started to turn my life around about it actually not being about me, I found this sort of oneness and this shared pain with other people and the rest of the world. And that took years to figure out. Like, I still struggled, and there are still times where I dip into it and I'm like, oh, it's because I'm being so me right now.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, let's talk about where you are today. You know, like, you've obviously built the strength to, you know, take that part of your life and, you know, like, use it to inspire others and, you know, build this, you know, build you into you. Like, the stuff you do is incredible. The way you inspire people and try to help people, it's so awesome.
Thank you.
What is one thing that you think people either misunderstand or misinterpret about your depression or depression in general?
Gosh. What a good question. I think, I mean, about mine personally, or just as like mentally ill folks around the globe?
Let's talk about you. Let's talk about yours personally.
Oh, that's an easy one then. Like, people are like, there's no way you're depressed or have anxiety. You have a job, you're outgoing, you have energy, you have a boyfriend, you live in a nice city. Like, there's so many things that I'm not allowed to have in order to be depressed according to other people. You know, I can't take care of my body and myself. I can't be like meditating and doing yoga and breath work and be depressed. Like, there's all these things you can't be, from both sides, from people that are like, no, you're doing so well, and from people that are like, this is what it looks like to me, and I can't identify with your experience, so therefore yours can't be valid. Yeah, that's when I get a lot, where I'm just like, all right, again, I'm like, I just kind of have sorrow for those people.
It's actually, I mean, that kind of, you know, stereotypical behavior for people is like, it's very common. Like, you know, you look at, I mean, even some of my friends, when, you know, they're going through a rough spot, and you'll hear the comment from somebody else saying, oh, what's he got to be depressed about? He's got a great job, he's got a house. And it's like, it's got nothing to do with, like, you know, these things. It's like, you know, it could be inherent, like, you know, it could be genetic, it could be, you know, it's just something that's developed over time and they don't know what triggers them. Like, and some people don't even know they're actually depressed.
Yeah. Or like what exactly, to your point of like trauma triggers, right? Like, all of us had traumatic childhoods and upbringings, and how that might manifest later on in life when our body feels safe and able to process these things. It can impede and implode on your whole entire life as an adult. I have a really strong feeling and defense for people who experience psychosis and like mania, because that often comes from trauma or, you know, undiagnosed issues, that like we have such a negative and scared view of people that are borderline or, you know, schizophrenic or manic or psychotic, that it's become just such a one feeling story about someone who experiences that, rather than looking at like, well, why did they get there? How did that happen? What were their circumstances? And like, how can we help these people? And so I found a strange passion for like sticking up for those kinds of people in my life.
No, that is, I mean, that's admirable. You know, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, we need more of a, you know, support from the society, basically, when we know someone's going through something, rather than being like, you know, you've got nothing to feel sad about. You feel like, hey, it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to you know, feel whatever it is that you're going through. But if you want to talk about it, we're here to help you. And I think that part about this whole positive mental health campaigns that are going through social media right now, I think that's kind of the part that they're missing. It's like everyone's promoting, you know, positive mental health, like talk to somebody. It's like, well, we don't really know how to reach out to people. There's no really, you know, kind of campaigns around, okay, well, how do we approach something that we know is going through something, and how do we say, hey, talk to me?
Yeah, you don't get taught that, like, your whole childhood, and especially for men, forget about it. It's like, suck it up, don't talk about it, don't feel, you can't be anything but strong and sexy. Like, and then all of a sudden, society's like, JK, we want to hear from you, like, fuck toxic masculinity. And I'm like, wait, we have no processes of unlearning this. Again, especially for men, especially for black men. Like, there's this societal upbringing shaping that needs to change before we give space to people in their adulthood to be like, hey, this is something you should be able to overcome, because now we have resources and like a campaign and a Twitter hashtag. And it's like, well, shit, we're not all that lucky.
Exactly. I think that's, I mean, you bring up a good point. Yeah, you're talking about like, you know, men being brought up, you know, to be masculine and be who they are, and like, you know, be like, you know, confident, and like, men already struggle with trying to find their identity in society, and then we just turn around one day and go, okay, you know, it's okay to be soft and nurturing and talk about your feelings. And it's like, you know, especially for, you know, younger guys trying to, you know, still trying to figure out their place in the world, like, this can be confusing for them. Oh,
big time. And I think it comes a lot from your parents, but also like the friends you hang out with, the teachers you have, the mentors. Like, it's more than just having good parents that are like, fuck gender norms, be how you want to be. It's what are we teaching people in schools? What are we teaching in religion? How are we promoting products? Like, I still laugh at the like men's body wash, like shower wash that's like rock hard, stone coal body wash, and women's is like flower, lilac, and you're like we're so far away from breaking those. Like, we have so much to backlog that shit to fix.
You should mention it, because even when my wife and I were looking at buying our Tesla, like the sales guy was like, yeah, man, like, you can throw a couple of golf bags in here with the boys, you can go on a golf weekend, like, Chloe, you can like put the kids in the back and you can go shopping. And it's kind of like, all right, well, let's just throw stereotypes out there with, don't well,
you should have been like,
just buy the car.
You should have been like, actually, I plan on buying this Tesla to cry over my wealth and hardships. See what he really said there.
I just needed a safe place to cry in the office, and they said I couldn't do it in the stairwell anymore, so I gotta get in the car.
Exactly. Oh man.
Okay, you mentioned your triggers, and the things that cause your spirals. Like, how have you come to terms with identifying what those triggers are, and how'd you go about managing them?
When the word like trigger became popular, I was like, oh, that's very valid for other people, but I don't feel like I have triggers. I don't feel triggered by things. I just all my shit kind of comes out of nowhere, and I have no explanation for it, and my body just, and I was so sympathetic to it, but I couldn't relate to it at all. And boy, have I learned, what triggers me, if you will, and it's usually not very graceful. It doesn't I don't discover it and think about it in therapy and I'm like, wow, that's beautiful. It's like, no, I was locked in the trunk of a car as a kid, and now I have found that elevators propel panic attacks for me, and airplanes propel panic attacks for me, and it comes from very chaotic moments of realization what something is as a trigger. But I don't think the world is responsible for your triggers. I don't think we are going to be able to censor the world soft enough to account for everyone's triggers. So I think it's really up to each individual to figure out what it is and how to manage it, because people aren't going to stop telling fucking rape jokes and say racist things, and that people aren't stopping that anytime soon. So how do we cope? And yes, there's always a teachable moment, and yes, if you have the strength to give a lesson, all for it. But there's something that happens when we're triggered by something traumatic where we don't usually have the grace and expertise to take a moment and be like, let's unpack that with each other.
No, I completely understand that. It's I think it's different things for different people, and we can't continue to wrap the world in bubble wrap thinking it's going to solve everybody's problems.
Right.
I think we have to give people the tools to actually identify these things for themselves and learn how what works best for them. Some people it might be therapy, some people might just be using an app, some people just need to go to the gym. What do you do to manage your depression and anxiety on a daily basis? What are the tools that work for you?
It's been a rainbow of things, right? I've been in the mental health game for a very long time. So I started with your classic SSRIs and CBT therapy. I've done a little bit more out there things. I recently tried getting off all my medications and microdosing, and that didn't do very well. So now I'm back on all my medications, and I'm about to start ketamine therapy, and I've done Reiki and acupuncture and oh gosh, what haven't I done? I haven't done I haven't done a full dose of psilocybin or LSD. Everything else I've probably tried for mental health. So any kind of exercise, float tank, saunas, cold plunges, all that stuff. But what I've found that sticks, no matter where I am, what age and where I am, is that routine gives me so much freedom, which I know can sound a little contradictory, but when
I know what you mean.
Exactly, like for right now, my routine is get up, take the foster dog out, let him have some joy in my life because he's so fucking cute. He's a 40, 50-pound bulldog. Get a matcha latte, listen to the Daily Stoic for 3 to 5 minutes on my podcast, do 20 minutes of yoga, 10 minutes of breath work, meditate with the Sam Harris app, and then by like 9 o'clock I'm working and like getting my day done. And I quit drinking like almost 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago. And you just have so much more time when you're sober. Like you're not hungover and sleeping in anymore or like planning events around alcohol. And that has been hands down the best fucking thing for my mental health. By far, bar none, no fucking comparison. Like no matter what is in my routine, whether it be journaling or you know, acupuncture, whatever, not drinking has been a huge healing point for me, for sure.
We were very similar because, like, you know, obviously during COVID and when, you know, obviously living in LA, you know, California, like things were shut down, like you just couldn't do anything. And we lived very close to, you know, our friends, and it got to a point where it's like, you know, it wasn't just like a glass of wine here and a glass of wine there. It was, you know, it was a bottle of wine here, and okay, well, tonight we're doing shots, you know. And
yes.
And I just remember getting to a point where it's like, I'm not enjoying this glass of wine now because I like wine. It's because I'm just fucking hating being in quarantine and being locked inside the house right now. And like I was struggling.
Yeah,
you know,
big time.
And for a long time. I mean, my entire, you know, most of my entire adult life, I've been really good at identifying when I'm depressed, you know, when I'm going through something. But during quarantine, I didn't.
No,
you know,
it was a collective depression.
Yeah, yeah. It's like I mistook my depression for boredom.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
I thought, I feel like this because I'm bored. Like, you know, I can't go to the gym. I can't go to the mall. Like, we can't do stuff. And
we're social creatures.
Exactly, you know. And I realized and I know just not for me, but like for everybody, it was like, you know, quarantine, you know, affected people. People hadn't suffered from depression before. You know, being that isolated, like, you know, you hear people I've spoken to, like they just tell stories of like, I, you know, drank myself into, you know, oblivion. You know, I tried drugs for the first time, and now I do coke every weekend. You know, it's like things like that. And you know, again, I think it's exactly. We need to normalize these conversations now. It's like, you know, people use these, you know, vices to you know, cope with depression when, you know, we could be obviously better alternatives.
Yeah, it's also a way to disappear, right? Like when you're that drunk, you're not really keeping track of time. You get to sleep in the next day. It's like you make your life and consciousness experience a lot less controlled and visible, right? It's a way to disappear. And what I realized was like that was my way of not showing up to life, right? Like I thought I was doing something because I was drinking. I was like out with friends, or I was at a pregame or a football game. Like I was doing something because I was drinking. And that's the truth is, drinking is not fucking doing anything. Like it's ethanol. Yeah. It's a Band-Aid. It is a social lubricant. Like there's so many things that we all think we're using to cope, but we're hurting our ability to heal. And all power to the people who can have like a glass of wine and be just like fine. I can guarantee you 99% of the people who drink aren't doing it like that and don't have the healthiest relationship to alcohol, or at some point in their life go, well, it's fucked up. If you've ever woken up and said, I'm done drinking, I'm done, this is the last time, like, you've been there, you know?
Yeah. The boozy brunches, you know, the Friday after week.
The baby showers, the birthday. It's like, what the fuck? The work events. Like, Jesus, what part of our lives isn't alcohol?
We got married in New Orleans 2 years ago, and it was a destination wedding. Like, you know, all my friends and family were from Australia. My wife's family were like, they're from Seattle. All our friends were in California. So we all basically went to New Orleans for a week, and we partied like just, you know, for like 5 days straight until the wedding. party the night of the wedding, and then I remember waking up Sunday afternoon thinking, I can never drink again.
No.
Like, you know, like I had the best week of my life.
Yeah.
But I remember like the next few days, I just remember just being at this low point. Like I just don't feel good mentally. Like, you know, forget the physical aspect of killing my liver for a week.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't a good mental spot for me. And like, it's kind of where I've like learned how to manage my relationship with alcohol better.
Yeah. Well, alcohol is a depressant. We forget.
Yeah.
You know, every day, like no matter how great it makes you feel and no matter how great the event surrounding it could be, you're every time you drink fighting against a depressant. And like your wedding, best week of your life, right? Like it's gonna be an amazing event, but you have actively, and I don't mean to like point this at you, but it's like you've now activated that part of your brain that says like not only give me more of that Band-Aid, but also now I'm going to be drained of it and crave it. And literally your brain shrinks when it's hungover. It pulls away from the skull bone. And it's, you look at it and you're like, what the fuck? Was that worth it? I don't know. That's why so many more people smoke weed and do mushrooms now.
That's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, sure is.
Let's say you have a time machine and you can go back in time and visit your younger self, like when you first started, you know, struggling with depression. What would you tell yourself?
Oh man, it's so funny to always, I've been asked this question a lot before, and I always struggle with like what to say because I don't think myself at that age would understand. Like everything was so high stakes and everything was the most important thing, and the emotions were so high that if I like went back and told myself stuff, I don't think my younger self would get it. Like I just didn't have the life experience to understand why staying on this planet was worth it and why it would be okay eventually. Like I just don't think I would have had that foresight, you know. I don't think I would have understood it. And, you know, child work or whatever you want to call it, like inner child work is such a big thing in therapy of like going back and talking to your younger self and helping them heal. And I feel like whenever I do that, I reverse the roles. Like instead of talking to my younger self actually talks to my adult self, because when I think about my little self here, you know, I see this bright-eyed, hopeful, very tired and anxious girl, but that she was so full of excitement or anxiety for life. And now I look at that little girl looking up at adult me and saying like, wow, look at all this stuff you did. I thought we were going to feel like ass forever, or like I thought it was going to suck for so long. And like, oh my gosh, look at these things that like did make it worth it. And so, yeah, I know that wasn't answering your question, but I feel like that's the only way I can explain like why I never know what to say to my former self.
You can just bring back pictures and say, hey, you know, when you stick it out, this is what we accomplish.
Exactly. Like, look how hot you get, bitch. Like, go off.
Yeah. You can be like, hey, I wrote a book.
Yes.
Like, you wrote a book.
I would that was the one thing that I never in a million trillion years ever thought that I could do. And the fact that I did it, and it's about the subject that scared me the most in my entire life, that literally almost took me away from this earth, is still mind-blowing to me. Still crazy to think about.
It's also one of the courageous things I've actually heard someone do in battling depression. Like you exposed yourself in this book.
Yeah,
you know, you really like you did, like, you know, like you were raw. Like it's you know, like
Thanks.
There aren't too many people that can actually do that. Like, you know, take, you know, a traumatic and a shitty part of their life and go, hey, I want to help you guys with this, you know, and like that's what this world needs more of. Is like we need more Kelsey Darraghs to be like,
oh,
like no, it's I'm not blowing smoke up your ass here, but it's like, you know, we need more people like you that like it, that you know, want to take their pain and you know, help people with what they're struggling with. You know, I commend you for that.
I appreciate the kind words, but I always have to tell people, like, it was very selfish. Like, I wrote it because I wrote the thing that I wish I had when I was 17. Like, I wasn't thinking of all the people suffering I was like, okay, how do I make sense of this fucking shit I've been through? And like, how do I help, I guess, 17-year-old Kelsey? And so the fact that it has helped so many people is just a cherry on top, because I really wrote it selfishly for myself a bit. Like, I read my own book often.
Get that. So what's next for you?
Oh man, what an exciting question. Well, I'm currently working on my second book that is in the similar format of my first one, but it actually, the theme or the subject matter is about chronic pain, which is also something I live with, that I think has a huge, it has created a pandemic of people with mental health problems and physical pain that we don't talk enough about. So I'm kind of using a little bit of like therapy and practical physical tools to talk about chronic pain. And then always still in the mental health space, I currently have a documentary out with LeBron James's company, Spring Hill. And by out, I mean it's out shopping, not out in the world yet. It should be done by the end of this year, about a mental health case of a 15-year-old, she's now 16-year-old girl who was sentenced to 11 years in prison when she was only 13 years old for having a episode of psychosis. And what we've done there is, we started documenting it in 2020 when the pandemic started, and now she is officially in a halfway house and almost home soon. And we've got almost 1 million signatures on her GoFundMe. We've raised over $50,000 for the family for legal money and sort of reparations. And that has been a big part of feeling like not only are we doing something to help one person, but how can we look at the broader system that's fucked up and say, like, why are we sending police to mental health calls? Why are we getting people who are not trained in any sort of mental health capacity at all to respond to people who are in crises? Which I think, as we've seen with unfortunately so many deaths and unfortunately so many deaths of Black people, that it's a huge issue. And what are we going to do to change it? And I think, I mean, as you know, someone in Hollywood and media, I think we have a lot more power than we realize. And so that's been my main focus. And yeah, just chucking along living too. You know, that's hard enough. Especially these days with this, everything going on in the world, right? Yeah, casual pandemic stuff too.
I really appreciate you coming on today.
Yeah, thank you.
I think what you've done is it truly is awesome. I'm in awe of some of the stuff you've done, and
oh man,
I really, again, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thank you for doing this. I think having a guy talking about mental health is such a radical thing and is so necessary and important. So thank you for what you're doing. Good for us. Good for both
Good
of
for
us.
High
Good
five. For us. We're doing something. Well, thank you so much, Kelsey, and let's chat again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, Brody.
Thanks.